Welcome to the Passion and Purpose section. We are here gathered today, and I know some people are still trickling in, but this is a really fun little session that we're going to have as part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor Summit. So we feel so grateful that all of our fearless leaders who've been guiding us through the Florida Wildlife Corridor Summit also have this incredible belief and knowledge and experience with storytelling and different ways that we exhibit passion and purpose in this movement. So everyone, continue to trickle in, find a seat. We have this whole entire space, but we'd love for you to sit more condensed with us if you feel comfortable doing so. I am going to let another few seconds go by, and then I'm going to start with some housekeeping. The first bit of housekeeping is kind of fun. There are some coloring pages on all the tables, and you are allowed to color while you listen. Isn't that great? Okay? Neuroscientists say it can help you listen even better. So please do not feel shy to be looking down and using your creative urges on the page. That is welcome. Okay, let me start with some housekeeping things, and then I'm going to introduce our wonderful speaker here. So most importantly, everyone here, there are some tremendous field trips that are available tomorrow. You need to sign up ASAP. So please consider exploring a bit of Florida while you're here or while you're in this region. We have 3 field trips. The first is to visit a wildlife crossing that is currently in construction being built over I-4. If I were here tomorrow for that, I would go to that field trip because that is a lot of this conservation work in action, and that's really exciting to see. So that is one. There's also a field trip to Catfish Creek, which is a hike and then a swamp buggy ride. That sounds amazing. And last but not least, there's a buggy ride at the Disney Wilderness Preserve, which is a wonderful protected area that is managed by the Nature Conservancy. So again, if you're interested in any of these, even if you aren't sure if you're going to make it, please sign up. The field trips are posted at the top of the community board in the Whova app, okay? Don't be like me, download the app. You can also speak to Nicole Brand, who's waving her hand right here. She will help to coordinate the field trips and get you all set in. And if you have any questions about those field trips, accessibility needs, timing, or whatever, you can talk to Nicole, who is large and in charge. So just again to kind of orient us to what's going to go on today, we are in this session for now, and after this session is lunchtime, believe it or not, already. And then after lunch, University of Florida Journalism and Communications session is happening, and then we're going to go into some breakouts after that. And the breakouts are going to be Esri story mapping in the Key West room, and then the educational showcase, which will be right here. Okay, so now you all have a couple of tasks, okay, a little assignment to keep in mind while you listen and participate. In the Whova app, we're hoping to collect information from you all, just your gut impulse responses on what you're learning and what you might want to contribute, okay? So if you want to do this orally, then raise your hand and please join us in contributing. But there's another way to do this. So in the Whova app, on the community board, you will see an area that's essentially like kind of a sticky note whiteboard kind of area where you can write down just off the top of your head what's right, what's wrong, what's working, what isn't working, what's confusing, and what's missing from whatever topic is being discussed. All of this is going to be collected at the end so that we have a big, essentially, collection of people's impulses and instincts and feelings about, how this is going, what they're learning, what more there is to learn, what else, how can we deepen these conversations, or exactly what are we really nailing and getting right, and what do we need more of in that way. So again, what's right, wrong, working, confusing, or missing. And you can upload this in real time on the Whova app. We encourage you to add it in real time on the Whova app. That will actually save us some time at the end. Okay. Thank you all for attending. My name is Dr. Wynn-Grant. I am a wildlife ecologist. I am a National Geographic explorer, and I am really happy today to have the pleasure to introduce My dear friend, Vanessa Sorrell, who is a National Geographic employee, a longtime leader of the National Geographic Society's Impact Media Lab. And that was a concept at one point. Impact media was a concept that Vanessa helped to spearhead. You know, how can we use media to actually communicate so many of the scientific ideas that scientists and conservationists and landowners are out doing? And she has been widely successful in short-form, long-term, digital media, all across the board, played a huge role in the Florida Wildlife Corridor with getting some of the first media to legislators here in Florida that ultimately allowed us to have the impact that we really wanted to have here in Florida. Vanessa is a filmmaker. She is a creative genius, if I can say so myself. And I say that from working with her on film projects that have personally changed my life and the way that I work. She is going to lead us through some conversation and some presentation about what she sees as the future of conservation media, and in particular, impact media. She has taken time away from her extremely busy schedule running the Impact Media Lab, the newly formed Impact Media Lab at National Geographic Society. She's a wealth of knowledge. Use her while you can. She is going to keep her presentation a little bit more concise in order to make space for any feedback, any discussion that might be at the top of everyone's minds. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce key storyteller, filmmaker, also my friend, Vanessa Sorrell. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Ray. What a generous introduction. I hope I can live up to that. Thank you all for having me. I'm just so thrilled to be with you all today. I've just spent the past several days exploring the wild side of Florida and getting to see some of the really amazing, beautiful places you have here. And I just want to say I'm so impressed by the work that you all do to keep all of those places protected and healthy, and so we all can keep enjoying them. Chances are, if you're here in this track of the summit, you share my belief that storytelling can make great impact for conservation. And in fact, since its inception, roughly 150 years ago, the environmental movement has been using storytelling to help advocate for the protection of our wild places and wildlife. And the storytelling has been really top-notch. Everything from the paintings of the Hudson River School artists, roughly when the movement started, to the writings of Henry David Thoreau and Rachel Carson, to the beautiful blue chip documentaries that we watch on television and in theaters. But despite all of this amazing storytelling, we're still in a state of multiple environmental crises: climate change, mass extinction, pollution. So with all these beautiful stories told by some of the best storytellers in the world, why are we worse off now than when we started in many cases? And what are we as storytellers missing? What could we be doing that's more and to make more of an impact? And this has really been the central question of my life and my career. My journey as a conservation storyteller began at a very early age. I was pretty much born into it. My dad, who I was actually just visiting in Florida, is an interpretive naturalist, which back when he started out was a career he made up. But it meant that he got to spend his life leading nature hikes and writing and doing photography to really share his love of the natural world with other people. And so I grew up seeing the power of that and watching how his stories helped people love creatures and places that they might otherwise have not. And so I wanted to follow a similar path and have spent my majority of my adult life creating media that I hoped would make an impact. As Ray said, I'm now at the National Geographic Society, where I'm leading the newly formed Impact Media Lab. And the mission of this lab is to produce stories and media that achieves real, measurable impact for the goals of the society and our programs. So in order to fulfill that mission, I've spent the past 6 years or so really diving into the science of storytelling, testing new formats, and really trying to answer that question. What more could we be doing as storytellers to help move the conservation agenda? And in general, what I found was that in order for us to succeed, we actually needed some new narratives for conservation. Our traditional narratives just weren't reaching the global population that we needed them to. So today I'm going to share with you some of the ways that my team has changed our storytelling methods to help achieve greater impact. So the first thing I discovered when I started really looking into the way we were forming our narratives was that many of our stories weren't actually stories. It turns out we were using that term story pretty loosely, but that a story is actually something very specific, a specific way of communicating that involves a character moving through a sequence of events and experiencing conflict along the way. And there's a lot of science, very interesting science, that says that our brains actually evolved to understand information and to communicate in this way. Some scientists think that these narratives allowed us to rehearse dangerous situations and solve problems, two things that helped us to survive as a species. And some science has even shown that even now, when information is presented in narrative form, people have increased comprehension and memory and are better able to then communicate about what they've learned. And this is what that looks like in graphic form. And I can thank our friends Ann Seawright and Matt Sheehan from the University of Florida Center for Public Interest Communication for this graphic, as well as for a lot of the science I'm going to reference today. I highly recommend their report, The Science of Story Building, which really helped me to figure out how to be a better storyteller. So when I looked at the way we were telling conservation stories, I realized that we were getting stuck in that first stage of exposition. We had this tendency to deliver all of the information and the facts, and wanting people to believe that because things are true and accurate, they should change their behavior. But that's actually not taking advantage of the way our brains have evolved to communicate. Looking for a little more guidance on how to build a better story, I came across these 7 basic plots. And you could probably think of examples of each. Rags to riches, can someone name a good rags to riches story? Yeah. Yes, that's a good one. Right. Secretariat was one idea. Any other ideas? Cinderella, yeah, that's the one that I always think of right away. Cinderella, rags to riches. What about overcoming the monster? Jaws is a good example of that. Any kind of horror movie. So when I thought about these plots, I also realized that conservation stories tended to be a tragedy, most often a tragedy. So I really wanted to figure out, how do we tell the conservation story using one of these other interesting plots. And one of the plots I've been able to use time and time again is the quest, because science in general really lends itself to that plot line. It's all about solving problems and discovering the unknown. So in 2018, my team was asked to cover a National Geographic climate science expedition to Mount Everest, where a group of scientists would be studying the ways that the mountain and the surrounding region were changing due to warming temperatures. Our goal for this story was to increase awareness and understanding of climate change and its impacts amongst new audiences. So I knew I wanted to stay away from the typical tragedy climate change story, and I thought a quest was a really good way to engage a new audience. So let's look at how we set this story up as a quest.
This is a different expedition than we ever had before.
We're working where basically no other scientists work.
This is the highest place in the world.
The climate is changing.
These glaciers are melting. It's very important to predict how fast it's going to happen and how it's going to influence human.
Mount Everest is part of the Himalayas. We're here on a 2-month expedition with National Geographic.
It is coming.
The largest scientific expedition ever conducted on Mount Everest. The scientists involved in this program came from glaciology,
Shifted a little bit here.
geology, meteorology,
There's panels in here.
biology, and also from mapping.
This is an important contribution to understanding how change is occurring and the implications of that change for the entire Northern Hemisphere. The ultimate goal of this project is to turn the science into something that has value for the people.
So that you could see we focused on the story of the expedition and the quest to discover new information and share it with people. The other thing I wanted to share from this story was the inclusion of the challenges that the scientists face along the way as a way to really, if you remember the story arc, the importance of introducing conflict. So even though these challenges weren't necessarily about the science or the topic of climate change, they still were really important elements of building the story. So I'll show you how we presented some of those.
There's a reason that some of this has never been done before. Logistically, it's exceptionally challenging. It's physically demanding in and of itself just to climb and function up at 8,000 meters. To try to do science up at some of these elevations is an added challenge. I think people are feeling as good as we can at this stage of the expedition, and we're excited to move up to Camp 2.
As a scientist, we're used to having to be patient with things, and this expedition has been no different. It's been nothing but eat, sleep, think Everest for the last 9 months.
Camp 2 station is in.
This environment is uncontrollable. It's hostile. It doesn't care whether we're successful on our expedition, and we have to be prepared to deal with that as best as possible.
It's about 10:45 p.m. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit nervous. I am. I know how big the challenge is ahead, and I feel very confident in our team. We know that we may be limited by the weather, so we're going to try and get up there just as the sun is rising when the winds are lowest. We have maximum for Oxford about 3 hours to install the station. We need to be efficient and work as a team.
Shoot the balcony. You go to my house. I'm not getting enough air in. You have to lift my glass like this. Put them at the batteries. You're close to work. Yeah, we fan it, the batteries fan it. So I just have to wait.
I'm a bit worried that we won't be able to think clearly. We may make a mistake that means we leave those stations in a position that's suboptimal, that they're not transmitting.
So we try to warm up the down jackets, stuff like the armpits. The sun's about to come up, we can help a bit too.
My fear is I won't know my limitation, that all their efforts for nothing. It's about being resilient in the face of a mountain that really doesn't care about you.
Temperature? Yeah, it's good. No other wind, huh?
All right, so you can see this is an especially extreme expedition, but you have the weather, you have the equipment malfunctioning, physical challenges. Even if your expedition is not this extreme, I'm sure that your science and conservation work does present challenges that might not have to do with the information, but still can be used to help build the story. And we found that when we told the story of climate science in this exciting quest narrative, we were able to reach a wide and new audience. We brought the media to places like the X Games and really engaged the adventurer community who might not have otherwise been thinking about that climate change was relevant to the things that they loved. And we also heard from kids who, after seeing the video, wanted to become climate scientists because they really identified with Baker and Tom and all of the other scientists on the mountain. And this brings me to the next discovery I wanted to share about storytelling for conservation, and that is how we are casting our characters. And this is something I think we also need to rethink and think about how we're casting humans in our conservation stories. Because when we experience a story, we put ourselves in the role of those characters, which leads to empathy, which as science has proven to then lead to taking action. So when I looked at our conservation stories, I saw that many times they were of two extremes. Either we were showing pristine wilderness, completely absent of humans, or with humans as an outside passive observer, or we were telling a doom and gloom story with humans as a villain, responsible for the destruction of our environment. So neither of these narratives really offer an opportunity for an audience member to engage or to put themselves in the role of a conservationist. So when I began thinking about our Last Wild Places film series, I knew I wanted to avoid those two extreme narratives. The goal of the Last Wild Places project was to engage people from all over the world and encourage them to support the 30 by 30 movement, and particularly to protect the places in the areas where they lived. So we couldn't do this by leaving people out of the story or by casting them as villains. So we instead told stories about how the lives of humans and nature are actually interconnected and complementary.
The war took a lot from this place. We all started from this wilderness. And it has to remain on us. Otherwise, we lost our identity. We lost part of us. I am part of the next generation of women that have to make sure that this place survives.
It's difficult to explain to somebody who did not know what was here, but myself, I knew what was here. We are in Gorongosa National Park in southern Africa, very close to the Indian Ocean. Tourists, they used to come from all over the world, and animal populations used to be huge. War in Mozambique was very terrible. 1 million people died. When a country faces war, nature is face-to-face challenge. Animals have been poached to to buy firearms and equipment to feed soldiers. 90% of animal population disappeared. Our mission of this park is to restore the Gorongosa ecosystem, not only nature, but also to develop human beings.
So you can see how the experience of the humans and the wildlife followed the same path, and were really interconnected. And also, can anyone remember the plots and think about what plot structure that might have been? Yeah, exactly, rebirth, yes. So experiencing tragedy, but then overcoming it was the plot structure we chose for this film. The second thing I wanted to do when we approached this series was really redefine who was considered a conservationist. And this is actually something I've seen you all in Florida do really well. Because in general, if our goal was to build support for 30 by 30, we needed a global audience, and we needed a global audience to feel that they could be part of this movement. This was especially important in the film we made about the American Prairie Reserve in Montana, that's where I first met Ray. Because they're a small but very vocal opposition group in the region, had actually taken over the narrative of the conservation project. So it's a really interesting example of storytelling and how it can really sway public opinion. This opposition group had framed the story as one where a group of outsiders, the conservationists, were taking land and heritage away from local people who they had described as the primarily white ranching community. So I intentionally wanted to reframe the story to redefine who was both being cast as local and as conservationists. So we chose to focus on the perspective of the indigenous community, some of whom were also ranchers. And these are some of our characters, Dave and Ronnie Crosco.
Ranching has been in my family probably about 100 years. I'm the 5th generation rancher here. You always hear the term that stuff gets in your DNA, I guess, and that's probably what it is. It's just in my blood. My dad, he bought this when he was a young man in his 20s. We've scattered his ashes here. I'll probably get scattered here too, I suppose.
I had essentially grew up about an hour north of here and moved back here and doing our thing.
I told her, move back here and live a nice, quiet, leisure country life. She told me, I get bored easy, so I'm trying not to let her get bored.
I'm not bored. We joke sometimes when we're having coffee on our front porch that people pay to go on vacation to live the lifestyle we live. And, you know, there are days that it's hard, but there are more days that it's really nice.
I think there's constantly threats facing ranchers. They're afraid of getting diseases from the buffalo. They're afraid of predators or land grab. It just seems like every time you turn around, the deck is stacked against you. So when I heard about American Prairie Reserve, my first opinion were very negative. I was very much against them. It's like, go away, leave us alone. It's not how we live here. But as I started educating myself, I got involved with wild sky ranching, which is a branch of the APR. Saw it as an opportunity to make a few bucks to utilize these conservation practices, whether it be wildlife-friendly fencing or camera traps. Wild Sky sets up cameras, and then you get a picture of a mountain lion or a bear. You get a couple $100, and that adds up over the course of the year. That helps buy hay or part of a vet bill, but definitely helps my bottom line. And so far, the camera traps have caught bears, mountain lions, and to my knowledge, I have not lost a single calf. Man, these coyotes are gonna make me rich.
Yeah.
So I think we are living in harmony, living in balance, and wildlife is thriving, and they're doing well.
I'm gonna have to go get more clothes on.
The wind's got a bite to it. To leave this land as a legacy is extremely important.
Ranching is evolving, and it has to evolve. And I think if we're not very mindful of the connection that our society has to have with nature, it'll be too late.
So you can see how we had Dave and Ronnie are lifelong, their families go back generations living on the prairie. And also he spoke to his hesitation about the conservation effort, and then how he came to appreciate it and be a part of it. So that was a way we really wanted to show that conservation isn't limited to one type of person and can be really a community effort that fits with many different lifestyles. And the final thing we wanted to do with this series in terms of characters was to portray humans not as the problem, but actually as the solution. So we chose characters that were leading rewilding efforts and having success in bringing ecosystems back to life. And here's a clip that demonstrates that.
Rewilding is not only about bringing back the keystone species that went extinct.
Wow, I get it!
Rewilding is a proactive conservation action that brings joy to your soul. When I see a group of macaws flying, what you see is all the effort that you put so that these birds can make it. It's many months of work with any individual, so it's not just two macaws flying, but also a lot of history behind those incredible colors. We don't live in cities, we live in the place where we are working. We become neighbors of the local people. They are the ones that can tell you the stories about the animals, about the places. As a team, we are really proud that we are developing a good example that we don't need to destroy nature to have a better life quality. You just feel a great satisfaction that we are fixing, as a species, most of the bad things that we did in the past. I always think is if we can reintroduce jaguars in a place that they went extinct, what else we cannot do? I think it's like we can do everything.
That was in, I forgot to mention, Ibira National Park in Argentina. And I just love that quote by Sebastian where he says, we're fixing all of the things that we have destroyed in the past. And you just really see this group of people taking action and bringing wildlife back to a place where they had been extinct. So they're humans, a part of the solution, we're not the problem or the villains in that story. And our results for this series were successful with the choices we made. We showed we were able to stimulate all kinds of support for the organization and even the individual people who we featured in the films. There were reports of increased fundraising, media interest from news outlets, speaking engagements offered to some of the characters, and increased participation in the overall efforts. The other thing you probably noticed or felt when you watched some of those clips brings up the final element I'd like to share with you today, and that is the intentional use of emotion. So think about that jaguar release and how you felt. Anyone want to share how they felt when they watched that? Yeah, so hopeful and energized and feeling like, sign me up, I want to be a part of this. And up here you see just some of the many emotions we can engage when we're telling conservation stories. Many times when I read a conservation story in the paper or watch an environmental film, I feel the negative emotions that are listed here. I feel angry or guilty about what humanity has done, sadness. So I'm not denying that those are valid emotions to feel about some of the problems we face, but science has shown that these types of emotions can be paralyzing and can actually disenfranchise an audience. So when thinking about the emotions you want to evoke with a conservation story, think about how we can focus on some of these other emotions that have been shown to actually increase engagement, such as pride, joy, awe. These can actually be more useful when you're looking to engage people in a particular issue. And one of my favorite examples of this intentional use of emotion is the film about what brings us all here today, Saving the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which we made in partnership with the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation and also Carlton and his Panther the Panther program. Now this was made specifically to inspire Florida state leaders to pass the Corridor Act. So we knew that we didn't want to focus on anger and guilt in relation to the disappearance of the corridor. We instead wanted to highlight a diverse group of people from across the state who could speak to the pride they felt in their state and also the importance of the corridor in supporting their livelihoods and lifestyle. Here's a short clip, if you haven't seen this film yet, that shows that.
Florida is like no other place on earth. It's the land, it's the water, it's the people, and the Florida Wildlife Corridor is the backbone that connects it all.
But we are seeing changes because of those 1,000 people a day that are moving to Florida.
We have to maintain that our environment in the state of Florida is our #1 priority. Without it, we do not have healthy water, we do not have healthy beaches, and people don't come here.
It took Mother Nature and God a long time to develop this land like it is. And we just need to slow down and figure out how we're going to save it.
So again, highlighting non-traditional conservationists and showing the pride in the state and the care that local people feel for the corridor and for the landscape. The other emotion we wanted to evoke here that was kind of unique to conservation storytelling is the idea legacy, the theme of legacy, and which evoked the emotion of love of family, as well as hope for the future. But that emotion, the familial love, is not something you see often in conservation films, and we thought was a really strong way to connect people with this story of the Florida Wildlife Corridor.
When I started out trying to tell these stories, I was doing it for the bears and the panthers, and now I realize I'm doing it for my kids. A little bit. 30 years from now, my greatest hope is that my kids can travel a wildlife corridor that's still here running through the heart of Florida.
Now's the time to write a legacy that Florida will remember for generations. Now's the time to strike and write what will be a lasting legacy of Florida. It's a unique opportunity. It's not going to come around again.
You know, you always have to have hope because the caring of the environment goes from generation to generation, and we're only borrowing this point in time. And it goes back to our people. We're always taught, as long as there's one, there will always be a tomorrow.
I want my grandkids to say he was a good granddad. I want them to say that he had vision and that he did take good care of the land and protected it, and that he saved it where we could go ahead and do the same thing with our grandchildren one day.
We have the ability in the state of Florida right now to not only this to be our legacy, what we did in our lifetime was save these wild places and turn Florida around, but we can be the model for the rest of the planet.
When we come together to save this Florida Wildlife Corridor, we'll be saving these lands for our children, but also setting up a global example of what's possible for people and nature together. And that's something worth fighting for.
Helps that Carlton's kids are so cute. But it shows that really you don't need to only rely on these feelings of anger and grief over environmental causes. You can be looking at evoking emotions of love and pride and hope. Because we all know how that story ended, I'm proud that the film was part of this amazing effort to protect the Florida Wildlife Corridor and pass the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act with unanimous support, which is so impressive and a testament to the work that everybody here has done. So really proud to be a part of that. I wanted to close with this inspiring quote from Nelson Mandela, which is about the need to connect our vision of a better future with the actions necessary to get us there. And I really think that storytelling can be the thing that connects those two. When I look throughout history, I see that storytelling has inspired some of our most amazing human achievements. It's sent us into space, and it's inspired these incredible cultural revolutions. So if we as storytellers, as conservation storytellers, can create new narratives that harness that power of storytelling, I have no doubt that we can solve the environmental challenges we face today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you to our amazing audience. I felt like I was at the movies for some of that, which is extra special. And we have such a treat in having Vanessa here because we get to see some of the incredible films that she has put together and envisioned from the start. And now that we got that comfy, cozy listening time, it's time for us to hold a discussion and to really, again, sink in with each other in a different way and open up about what we know, what we don't know, what we're thinking of. And please feel free to, take a moment and jot down your thoughts. But Vanessa is here with us, and I am here as support. to really moderate a discussion and learn and maybe even workshop a little bit, some ideas that we all might be developing. So there isn't a set structure for this part. We're going to ask people to kind of raise your hands at first and offer a question, a comment, feedback. If you would like to just praise her work, feel free. I do it all the time. Again, Vanessa's and team's big vision for saving the Florida Wildlife Corridor really paid off, right? So it was proof of the impact that media can have. And so again, we have a bit more time to talk about a lot of the examples here and a lot of what you all may have in mind that your organizations are doing. So I'm happy to see hands already. I saw yours first. We'll hear what you have to say, and then in the back.
Do you storyboard? What's your process for creating these films? Do you storyboard them out? Could you explain some of that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I don't personally use storyboards because it's documentary, so you can only plan so much. But we do come up with an outline of how we think the story might flow, and then plan our field production around that outline, making sure we're getting certain scenes and interviews. So the things we plan ahead are that outline. I personally write out a treatment, what's called a treatment of how the scenes I need and what things I'd like people to say, in general, and then develop shot lists and interview questions that would hopefully bring those themes out. And then you get into the field and you see what you get, and you come back and. I have a general, that general story structure, the narrative arc, I do have that in mind, yes. So we don't do, purely fly on the wall documentary for conservation impact work, because oftentimes we are wanting to convey a specific message or emotion, feature certain characters. So we have a loose outline and a loose story arc developed, and then we go into the field and see what we capture in reality and what actually happens, and then go back and see where it all fits. So in some ways, these films did turn out to be what I envisioned, but in other ways, they could be completely different. Characters come and go, and things happen that you don't expect. It's a fun process.
That's a great question. And before we go to the second one, would anyone else like to jump in about storyboarding, or is anything similar, comment, personal experience you'd like to share? Again, if we can enrich this conversation as much as possible with people's personal triumphs, failures, all of the above. Anyone else want to jump in about storyboarding? Sure. And I'm going to bring you a mic. I've been instructed to be the runner.
So yeah, to kind of piggyback that conversation, we produce a couple shows for TV, and it's kind of been ongoing and organic for us to figure out the most efficient way. Like, we're a small crew. We've got 2 producers, a director, and a PA that's editing now and doing all this wonderful stuff. But for us, and what a lot of people don't realize is, like, you write a story, right? It's like, this is what I want to show. But at the end of the day, you are storyboarding, you are writing an outline, right? You're trying to check those boxes of who you want to include, a lot of the shots you want to include. And then you don't write it until the end. You don't, for us, like, we found that, we'll string a show out and use that outline and take all that footage and give it to a writer. The writer and editor work kind of side by side, but that script isn't written and complete until your edit is just about done. And I know years ago when I discovered that, I'm just like, wait, what? You don't write a complete script and then go shoot it. I mean, maybe in fiction, but not nonfiction. So anyway, I just wanted to interject there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not fiction, and it's not a commercial. So if you're covering real life, you do end up, it comes together in the final stages, which is exciting. You never know what it will become until you get to the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pass it to you next. Hi.
I think where we get caught up is that we're so passionate about the information like you talked about, and we're so passionate about all of the science that we know. And what we forget about is that as people, as the general population, we're always asking, well, what's in it for me? And so I think starting at that what's in it for me from the general population's perspective is then how we can decide what story we need to tell and how we can use our information to answer that question for people. And I would love to know just a little bit more from you. I think our Florida Wildlife Corridor example was perfect for the family. That was the what's in it for me. Those who have families are passing this down to them. So what's your process in creating your stories and identifying the what's in it for me for your audience?
That's a great question, and what I didn't include in this this particular presentation was the whole strategic process that happens before we even think of what we'll be making. And for impact media, we always begin with strategy, and that involves identifying a clear goal. What are you looking to achieve with this piece of media? Who is your audience? Who do you need to reach to achieve that goal? And it's never the general public. I'll just put that out there. And then where will you reach them? Will you reach your audience in a theater? Will you reach them on social media? And you really need to put some time into answering those two questions, because that will determine all of your creative choices. So knowing the audience, I think, is especially important, because then you can start to think about, well, what is in it for this audience? What do they care about? What is their relation to the issue I'm presenting? So then it becomes not about the information you necessarily think is important for them to know, but really, how do you create that interaction and that connection with the story? And I will say one more thing on that. It ends up, what I love about the Florida Wildlife Corridor example too, is it changed the way we told that story. I mean, it wasn't about the panther, as other great films have been, but our story was not about the wildlife and the animals. It was about the people and the legacy, which for me became even more interesting. It was a new way of telling a conservation story.
I was just going to ask a question about the larger film and the impact videos. We have, generally, instead of storyboarding, we use beat sheets, and beat sheets are basically a big bulletin board with index cards. It's very old school.
Yep.
And that way, when the beats that you've planned, the scenes that you've planned become a reality, they go into the outline. If the ones that didn't get, worked out all that well don't make it, you can take them out. And it's constantly changing, so that it's a storyboard, but it's a beat sheet. The thing that we've run into trouble with now is that we're making a longer film for television, and we're also making short impact videos for these different audiences. And some are legislative, and some are stakeholder groups. And sometimes those two things compete, so that the list of things that you're shooting for the larger project has these internal kind of conflicts. You would shoot them differently for the different projects. How do you work that out, and how do you prioritize?
Good question, because you never have enough time or resources to do it all. So for us, we're impact media, so we always have to put that first. And the story that will help us achieve that goal, whatever it might be, is what we would prioritize. And so oftentimes our work is not for television, it's not for mass distribution, because we're focused on the goal. We always have that in mind. So I think as creatives, you should think very hard about what is it you personally want to achieve, and where do you want to fit in this space. Because I think there is a place for beautiful blue chip, Blue Planet television specials, because that kind of helps raise awareness and in general creates this ethos. But where I personally want to act and where I want to participate is on the more direct impact. So that's where I've chosen to operate. It's hard to do it all, because it ends up being two different projects.
I'm back here now, y'all, with two quick things. One, we don't typically encourage folks to pull out their phones and start looking down at your phones, but again, that's where you can put those notes into the Whova app on the community board about what's working, what's not, what's right, what's wrong, what's missing, and there's a couple others that I said before, what's working, etc. What's confusing, what's jazzing you up right now. So again, as those thoughts come to you, please put them down, and it helps the larger summit team collect all this information. Second, Carlton just gave us a great idea. We have such brilliant minds here and such hardworking folks who've been contributing already. Will you please introduce yourself before you give your question or comment, just so that we know a little better who you are, since we can't read those name tags so far away. So I have a comment here, and then I'll get to you, and I'll go back down this way.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Vanessa. That was great. I'm Eric Bendick from Grizzly Creek Films and involved in the Panther work as well. I just want to explore one piece of your kind of story arc narrative. I think one thing that we take for granted is that exposition should come first in a narrative. And I think that's something that I have begun to interrogate a little bit, thinking really critically about what that exposition needs to do, how it frames, and how much do we need. Because exposition, as much as we want to frame up front, oftentimes a viewer doesn't want the subject to be framed to them up front. They want the space and the kind of the freedom to come into a story organically. And so I think as we evolve as storytellers, I think we need to really interrogate that idea that exposition should lay out that frame and give you answers right away, because really what we want to do is discover those answers. And just by minimizing some of that exposition up front, I think you open pathways for people to feel like they are discovering the story the same way we do in the world, the same way our brain, discovers a story. So that's just a comment, and I'd love to hear thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Exposition, where you see it on that story arc, it doesn't necessarily mean you dump all the information and answers right at the beginning. Exposition sometimes is just laying out the question and some of the background that then takes you on the rest of that journey. And you can weave in other bits of information throughout, but yeah, you don't want, especially depending on your audience, we're thinking about who you want to engage, and will a lot of factual information necessarily engage that audience and keep them watching. That's a good point. And Eric forgot to mention he's just completed and premiered his Path of the Panther documentary, which is just fantastic. I can't wait for everyone to see it.
Awesome. I just want to jump in and affirm a lot of what has been said already. Don't be too afraid to disrupt the norm, right? When it comes to storytelling, especially the really purposeful storytelling that so many of us are interested in doing, if we keep doing it business as usual, we probably won't get to those goals that we want, right? So conservation work needs to speed up, right? Environmental protection needs to speed up before it's too late. And so a complete disruption, or a disruption of what we've been taught, realizing maybe we had a miseducation and trying to do that unlearning and rebuilding in a new vision and a new lens, per Vanessa and your comments, might be the solution, or it might be one of the solutions. We might all end up doing storytelling quite differently, but as long as the impact is there, and as long as the change is being made, then we really are hitting those goals. I love how this is going. Joe.
Thank you. I'm Joe Guthrie. I'm a wildlife ecologist at Archbold Biological Station. I've been involved with a number of films, and I've kind of had a question for you about your films that have to work quite a lot with often really complex science, and that use, that where you end up talking to a lot of scientists to be spokespeople for their work. And it's interesting from the kind of science background. I'm sure that many people kind of from my field feel a bit, nervous, apprehensive about talking with filmmakers, committing their words or ideas to film. And so I'm curious how you work on that. It's not I shouldn't be representing this as just as a struggle for scientists. It's also can be a struggle for people who are landowners or are representatives from all walks of life, kind of struggling with needing to kind of being trained to set aside their personal biases or interests, and then needing to be effective spokespeople in causes that are being presented on film. That's my question, I guess.
That's a good question, and we do a lot of workshops to train scientists and other National Geographic explorers on communication skills like these. Sometimes it's a different way of communicating. When you write a scientific paper, you actually are presenting facts, and you have to be you're trying to prove something and be seen as correct. Whereas when you're making a film with a scientist participating, it's not necessarily about being correct. It's about communicating the importance and the feeling and the emotion involved. So I think. You have to deal with a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with it. Yes.
Maybe best most knowledgeable about their topic, but who are really uncomfortable with the idea that they're going to be on film.
Yes.
This may have a long shelf life. Who knows where this could go?
Right, and if they say something wrong, then will their colleagues, will it hurt their reputation? So I think first is realizing that is a legitimate vulnerability, and people that you're filming are making themselves vulnerable for you. And then the second is really building trust and then being true to that trust. And then third, I would say, is explaining the process and what you hope to get out of it, and having lots of long conversations that kind of help to coach your subjects on how to communicate. So there's a lot of, that is a really important part of the process, is working with your subjects before you even start filming, and building the relationship and the trust, and making sure that they're comfortable being on camera, because it is a difficult thing to do.
Okay, I need to see hands again. I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, and you were first. I'm going to head back here. Got a lot of smart people giving a lot of great comments. We'll go to you, and then you'll be next.
The one other thing I'll say about that, because that is a good question. A lot of times I'll work with scientists who had a bad experience with the media in the past, where they didn't have, their trust was abused, and there wasn't people, media crews might fly in and out. They're there for a day. They take up all your time. They film what they want, and then next thing you know, you're on, some sensationalized television show, looking in a way that you don't want to. So a lot of times we have to kind of make up for that and rebuild the relationship, not just with us personally, but with media in general, because it is, that's a fair concern.
Is it part of your process sometimes? I mean, I'm sure that a lot of your speakers or your representatives want to be able to review the work before it's published, and as a media outlet, it's up to you whether you do that or not.
Right, and we do let people review as a courtesy, but not to make edits, unless something's inaccurate. But I think that helps with the trust, is saying, yes, of course you can review this, and we can't necessarily make changes, but happy to have you. And I will say everybody's always been very pleased with the outcome, and in contrast to some of their previous experiences.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Theo Kowalski. I'm with Ocean Conservancy, and I'll be honest, we're kind of new to a lot of using media like this to tell some of these big stories. And I would say one of the big projects we just did recently was our Ocean to Everglades film series that we put together with some partners, especially the city of Miami, that was shown at Super Bowl 54 in Miami. Now, of course, this was right before the COVID pandemic. And so now we're kind of taking some time to really look at the story we've put together. And so my question for you and anyone else really is, what's the process like for revisiting a narrative to make sure that it's still accomplishing the same sort of goals? Like what's the process like for adapting? I mean, you even mentioned right at the beginning, there was, you sort of found like, oh, we need new narratives, things weren't working. Like what sort of signs are you looking for? How are you, thinking about when is the right time to stop and adapt and sort of change the narrative, if you even need to?
Well, one thing that we'll be doing as part of this new Impact Media Lab is developing new ways of measuring success, because that's very challenging, especially when in traditional media, your success is measured by ratings and number of clicks. So it's purely an awareness metric. It doesn't really measure whether you've achieved the impact. So that is a challenge, is figuring out how do we connect the viewing of a piece of media with the impact we hope to make. And I would say that would be a way of informing whether we have to revisit a narrative. Is that what you're asking? I think the other thing is, well, has the goal been accomplished? And if not, do we need another piece of media to help us get there? And then, do we have the budget? Because we don't often have the luxury of going back again and working on some of these issues really long term. Although I hope that we do.
Before we go to the next question, which is right here, does someone want to respond directly to this or any of the more recent questions? It looks like Jenny might. So.
So we've developed a theory of change that I have a slide, but I've been told not to exit out. Should I try it? Let's see what happens. Oh no. I don't think I can get to it now. Anyway. So we've identified different stages from awareness. It goes awareness, engagement, support, and then ultimate change goal. And so then we have different metrics for each stage. So awareness, you are measuring volume. How many people did we reach? What were the demographics of the audience? For engagement, we measure things like participation in a discussion. And this is all based on behavior change science. So that says that this is how you build engagement and action for a specific topic. Support can be measured. So our Last Wild Places project was all about support, and that was measured in, we did a survey to see, in general, after this project was launched, what had the organizations seen in terms of support, and they reported increase of donations, media interest, additional opportunities for them and their staff. And then the ultimate change is where you measure something like Florida Wildlife Corridor ACT. So each of those stages has a different type of metric. And it's really important to identify that up front so that there's always this mismatch between what is the impact, we think we're making an impact, and then we just use that term, but then you put a television special on, and because it mentions a conservation issue, you consider it impact, but that's not the case. So identifying which stage of the continuum you're on and then what are the right metrics is really important. No, so for every project, you basically think, okay, where are we now? We know we want to pass the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act. Where is our audience? Okay, they're generally supportive, so let's create a film to get them to actually do the action.
Okay, I have so many hands up, which is awesome. I am also especially happy to see so many female voices wanting to pipe up. That's great. Vanessa is a brilliant genius in my mind. Again, the Impact Media Lab was her idea for many years, and she really advocated for that. I'm bringing it up because many of you likely work in organizations that might adopt a similar idea. Create an impact media lab at your organization, or hire an impact media lab to work with your organization. It can be tiny, it could be one person, or it could be a whole team of people. This doesn't have to be isolated to National Geographic Society, but the principles and the concepts are something that I'm sure Vanessa would love to continue to share and really help mentor other folks to bring up. Okay. So because she's so popular, we are also running out of time. So please, connect with Vanessa when you can. We're still going to take some more questions, but I just want to be mindful of the time. So we're going to take several more starting here, and then we're going to move this way because I see so many hands. All right, but she's not leaving, folks. She's here all day.
So then it'll be really fast. William from ASTA Foundation, and I guess afterwards, I'd love to hear more about Impact Media Lab and really, is that something that we can talk to you, we can sort of exchange ideas, et cetera. But one of the things, and sort of piggybacking on what Eric said, that one of the issues we have in Florida is this enormous gap between the choir that is in all these rooms and that boots on the ground, and the knowledge, the awareness, the sort of desperation of seeing this happening. We're out there and seeing the dump trucks every day, and the gap of knowledge with everybody, especially on the coast sides, right? And it's not a question, but it's more of a sort of a comment of just feeling that desperation of making a film or a video or an educational series, and how do you bridge that gap? And it is such an enormous gap that, when you talk about exposition or you talk about the arc, which is usually not an arc for us, but more of a wave, because people are just, they glaze over, right? You start talking about too much of it, and so it's sort of that keeping them interested in stuff. And it's just such a sort of a desperate thing when we're making the films and the other stuff, and it's happening very fast. And so it's just more of a comment of just feeling that. I'm not sure everybody else is feeling it too. But yeah, at some point I'd love to know more about Impact Media Lab and how we can learn.
Yes, I'm happy to share, and I can happy to share this deck and also that slide that shows the theory of change. I think that would be really useful. I hope it would be. But yeah, as an individual, when you do feel that, you feel this almost a panic or this sense of desperation, and you really have to pause and think, okay, how can I do, I need to develop a strategy. And then you can proceed calmly through the strategy and actually, because I think that's where a lot of the kind of doom and gloom and angry conservation stories come from, is the feeling that we all have, like, this is an emergency, it's a crisis, and I do feel that, but then I take a deep breath and think, well, how do I want to achieve success? And then that changes how I approach it.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to take a question from over here.
I'm Vivi Dimmitt. Mallory's mom is probably how I'm better known now, but I've been an environmentalist all my life.
Well done.
And have watched over the years where we were actually, where we created Preservation Florida, and we were actually buying the land at the rate that you need to be buying it now, and things were happening, and then watched as it all sort of fell apart and was discouraged and dismayed and had given up, actually, and was depressed. And you came up with this film, and I give you great credit for pushing through the Florida Wildlife Corridor bill and having it actually made an entity, and then even getting the monies and the funds. But now we need to spend the funds and get it and get the work done. And as these questions are happening about revisiting stories, I'm thinking that somehow going forward, we need to keep telling the story. We need to keep it out front, and we need to do more of these maybe shorter or these short documentaries, like when we do finally acquire and buy the next piece, we need to maybe do a history of that and highlight it and tell the stories of the people and the animals on that piece to keep it going, was my thoughts, because it has been this visual, and you can see, hear, almost taste through these documentaries, and you can bring it to people, whereas you can't take the people to the place. So I
Yes.
really appreciate that, but I hope we keep going with these stories. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there are so many more stories to tell here, and especially as you think about what is the next challenge, and it's actually purchasing the land. So what do you need for that to happen? Funding. You need landowners willing to sell. So what stories can you tell to make those next actions happen?
Okay, a couple more questions.
Hey there, thank you. Meredith Budd with the Florida Wildlife Federation. Kind of a follow-up on what William was saying, and getting the general public, the lay people. So the Florida Wildlife Corridor film was focused on obviously the legislators and the decision makers, and a lot of the challenge is making that connection with people, general public. And we live in the generation of TikTok and Instagram Reels, and you are on your phone, you quickly slide, and anything longer than about 60 seconds is going to go right over someone's head. They don't want to watch it. So in that, understanding that, how do you overcome that challenge in order to captivate the audience to actually pay attention for longer than the short attention span that we tend to all have now with our digital age? That's something that we've struggled with in our Share the Landscape project. That is our educational project for trying to get that message out there, and it's something that I would really be interested in your take on how to overcome that.
Well, I think you always meet the audience where they are. So if people that you want to reach are on TikTok, we make TikToks, and we do a lot. So all of this, the great thing is all of this footage and this story can be repurposed for multiple platforms, and with the caveat that you would have to then tell the story in a way that's appropriate for that platform. But that's definitely something that we do. And then you really have to look at the analytics of the platform and what people are watching in those places. But I've heard of some pretty amazing campaigns that have happened on TikTok, and using, instead of one hour film, you basically make 100 30-second TikToks and release them over time to build that audience and tell that story. Rather than in one sitting, you tell it over small segments.
There's many more questions. I would love to jump in here as well. I was so glad that you asked about social media, because I have been curious also, Vanessa, what your answer might be as someone who makes feature documentary films. What you imagine is important with social media. And I loved your answer that you can still have that beautiful story arc, right? To make sure that your social, for you as an individual or your organization that you're representing, isn't lacking the story arc properly, because it can fit in 10 seconds or 60 seconds, or it can fit over a series of several posts, and that's how you can really hook them.
And one more thing about social is that it tends to be more, social is social. So it's not a way, you don't just make the same old documentary you would show on a screen like this and then just throw it up on social. You have to make it about connection and interaction and offer people a way to interact. So I think the most successful social campaigns are when there's a person involved that's kind of talking to you throughout. So who is that social media, who has a social media presence that we can be working with to help us tell these stories? I think that's an important thing to think about as well.
Yep. I will add, I have a lot to say about social, so I won't dominate. I will just add to, to extend what Vanessa is saying, especially in such mission critical fields as the fields we're in conservation, there's no reason not to just be a copycat, right? There's no reason to not just like see someone doing it well and then do exactly that, right? Especially if our goal is to like make the planet healthier or, increase the wellness of human beings on landscapes. If something is successful, copy it, do it. You don't even have to put your own spin on it, but make it yours with your characters and your stories. One of the benefits of having someone like Vanessa here speaking to us is that she represents an organization that really does social media very well. They do big media like her films super well, and then all the way down to social and all the way down to print media. So it's really great to see so much success here because all of us and all of our organizations are capable of that. And also remembering that, I don't know how many of you are like me and are millennials, but we invented social media a while ago, right? Like social is 15, almost 20 years old, right? I think Facebook does turn 20 this year, maybe. So, even TikTok has been around since before the pandemic. It just became very popular more recently for all ages. So my advice to jump in is to not necessarily rest on the social media platforms that are popular right now. Don't think it's static. Maybe the next impactful social media platform is just bubbling up, and you can be ready and poised for it. We already know that social has changed in the last year to be video first, right? And so that's something new and challenging. Us millennials didn't necessarily see that coming. But being video first offers a lot of opportunity to then tell a proper story, right, with that arc, or to make a series of things. And I loved how you put it, Vanessa, to meet people where they are, right? Landowners today in Florida might not be, prolific social media users, but all those kids that we saw in these films will be. They're going to be excellent, amazing, impactful, powerful people that love social, right? And that's going to be different than their parents and their grandparents. And so being able to educate folks using social media, being able to empower them on social, being able to be agile enough to adopt the next social media trend is, can be a superpower of conservation, albeit non-traditional. So I still think there is an amazing, really important place for feature-length films. That's like the heart and soul of storytelling. But being able to use a lot of these principles that we're learning for feature films all the way down to, itty-bitty bits of storytelling is also really useful. And that might be more accessible to many of our organizations that are just building this. Okay, I lost track. We have one here, and then I think a couple folks over here. And we might only have time for 2 or 3 more questions, y'all, because it's almost lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Wright, and thanks, Vanessa. This has been great. I just wanted to give a quick plug for an academic field that I'm part of called conservation marketing, and the Society for Conservation Biology has a conservation marketing working group. And so if you're interested in evidence that comes out of scientific research that you can then use, because I think a lot of times as storytellers, we have to convince the people that are paying for stories to, do things a certain way or to take a risk and, frame a message in a certain way. It's a great place to look. And I wanted to ask you, Vanessa, since a lot of times, the goal of these is to actually move people to action. Just from like a purely mechanical kind of standpoint, what have you found is most effective in these online platforms to, get people to take action? Is it a link? Is it a text to donate? And I know it varies by audience, but is it, at one point you had National Geographic had a big plastics campaign where people would go on and give a pledge. Are there certain kind of ways to move people to action that you've found to be most effective?
Good question. Well, I think it always depends on the platform and what you can expect from your audience who is there. So we found a lot of things that didn't work, like donating from a television show. Did not work. People just don't, it's too much effort to go to a different device and log in somewhere else and get out your credit card. But the donate button on our website where you just you're already there and it's one click, yes, that is a good tactic. Social media, again, people don't want to leave the platform. I think that's the big thing we've learned. People want to stay, and any action you ask them to take should be within where they already are. So that limits you, but also then if you think about, it's not just necessarily about that first action, it's about that whole theory of change, taking them along the continuum. If you're going to do a social campaign, you can ask for engagements through social, sharing the message, sometimes donate. If the social platforms, a lot of them have donate options, so that could work. So I would say in general, it's what can you expect people to do within the platform that you're using.
I'll also jump in here. I have some things to add. There's always ways that a lot of this can be richer and better and reach more people. So often we do, and ourselves included as representatives of National Geographic, make media for the people we already know will love it. And there's much more that we can do in order to increase the diversity of folks who are able to access it, right? So I would say that National Geographic needs to make sure that every film that they fund is translated into multiple languages and is shown in theaters in multiple languages in the United States, for example. That people who are hearing impaired can also access these films and be able to show up to premieres just like anybody else. There's so much accessibility that is not super hard, but could really, increase the message in terms of getting it out and getting it distributed. So again, for a lot of you all who are thinking on behalf of your organizations, think about things like language, think about things like translations, think about things like accessibility for people with disabilities or other ways of absorbing media. Think about what media means to different people at different moments. Think about timing with political events, timing with global events. There's a lot, and I love that you brought up conservation marketing, because there's a lot that is very urgent about conservation, but sometimes needs to take a back seat to other issues in order to get the proper audience that it needs. But even little things, language makes a big difference. There's a lot of really powerful movers and shakers in the world, people who can help us make a lot of change who are not English first, for example. And that is just a really simple tweak that we can all make and really include, even at our summits and conferences, et cetera. I'm going to take one over here, and then we might have to wrap up, but we'll see. One more.
Yeah, just to spin off what you said too, there's a lot of grants available. Like we just used one, for example, to take our kids' programming and do all audio descriptions for actually vision impaired. Because like most, ADA compliance is closed captioning and all that stuff if you're going to broadcast, obviously, but there's other means. Like I never even knew about, vision impaired audio descriptions, and it's so neat the way it turned out. Yeah. Didn't cost us anything. And we were able to take this content and distribute it all around the world in classrooms that, kids are unable to see. They can actually hear the show, which is really cool. My question, and I don't know if you're going to have the answer, or really anyone does, but like we produce long-form content, right? That's the heart of what we do, and we're not going to make 6-minute pieces or 1-minute pieces unless we're trying to drive people to that long-form documentary or series. And we're having the hardest time, and we're not a marketing agency, we're producers, but like we can serve ads on people's phones, and obviously people are gonna watch content where they wanna watch it, but like we want them to watch it on the couch with their family and download our channel like on Roku and be in that laid back environment. And we're just having the hardest time figuring out how to make that conversion to where like, this is more the question, do you foresee a future like when we sit down in front of our TVs and it's literally like it automatically puts us to the big screen, the family? Is there going to be a connection where we can easily get people from their mobile device and there be some fluidity where all of a sudden that doc is on the screen, how does all that work? Are you guys kind of researching that? Is there some technology or some sort of secret that we all don't know about? Because like, it's great if someone wants to watch an hour, PBS documentary on their phone, but like at the same time, I would rather it be in their living room with their family and really just kind of engaging with that and not getting notifications every 5 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's all about personal choice these days. People have so many options for where and how and when they can consume media, but I think the sitting on your couch watching long form is not going away. I mean, it's had a resurgence even with all of the streaming platforms. So I think I see that as continuing. I think people will also consume media on their phones, and they'll make the choice as to how they want to do it. Yep. I think also to a mix between your question and Gabby's about what works. I have seen a really important place for long form in that final stage of getting people to take political action, especially when you're working with leadership. Being able to create an event around a film screening that kind of highlights the importance and significance of an issue. That is our go-to for making actual political change happen, working with world leaders. So that's where we fit the kind of high-end, long-form television, photo exhibitions, that sort of media. So we are kind of working on figuring out, well, what fits best where along the theory of change continuum.
All right, y'all. It is almost time for us to wrap up, but we have a wonderful thought leader here who wants to help close us out. Carlton.
I don't know how I was going to close anybody out, but I did have a comment. It was just related to this Saving the Florida Wildlife Corridor film and audience and placement. We had a 10-minute version that we could play on an iPad in someone's office when they only had time. But for that 30-minute version, the pandemic actually gave us a little bit of silver lining. We rented the IMAX theater in Tallahassee for like $125, and we screened the film on a 100 giant screen for like 20 legislative leaders. And we did it like 3 nights in a row during legislative session, where we brought the lawmakers like a closer distance than you can get to your hotel room in this place, to the IMAX theater from the Capitol, and we're able to sit and immerse for 30 minutes on a huge screen and like feel the story. And so that's something to think about, like actually build a physical community event around the media, and it definitely has its place in the spectrum. I'm going to look back to Nicole and Dustin, our co-chairs, for this. How are we out of time, guys? I think so. Okay, so we'll send it off to Nicole, and this has been awesome, and I'm so appreciative to have so many communications and conservation role models sharing knowledge with us, and this is just the beginning of a great day together.
So another round for Vanessa, please. Applause for her.
And thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for your work with the Florida Wildlife Corridor.